Okay, so ready to dive deep into this question about Jesus.
Always ready for a good deep dive.
So the question seems pretty simple at first glance, like, was Jesus Jewish?
Right. Straightforward.
We got this article from the Biblical Archaeology Society, and I mean, the answer's right there in the title. Was Jesus a Jew?
Yeah, no mystery there.
But I think the real mind-blowing part comes when we start looking at like how much this whole idea of Jesus's Jewish identity actually like shapes how we see Christianity itself. Like it kind of changes everything.
Totally agree. You know, it's amazing how many people, like, throughout history have tried to kind of separate Jesus from his Jewish roots.
It's like they're trying to invent a whole new religion out of thin air.
Right. Just ignoring the foundation it's built on.
Yeah, and the article even mentions this guy Albrecht Rich,
Ritual, yeah.
a 19th century German theologian who basically portrayed Jesus as like anti-Jewish.
Yeah, he was part of this whole movement that wanted to show Christianity as, like, unique and superior, better than Judaism. And unfortunately, Ritual's ideas, they actually fed into a lot of the anti-Semitism in Europe.
Yeah, that's kind of scary when you think about it, like how distorting history for your own agenda can have these huge real-world consequences. Makes you wonder why people would even try to distance Jesus from his Jewish background in the first place. Like, what's the point?
Well, the article suggests it's this whole idea of, like, wanting to be unique. This need to present Christianity as something totally new and separate. But if you think about it, the whole concept of Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah, that comes straight from Jewish tradition.
Right. It's like trying to say you invented pizza, but forgetting about the whole history of bread making.
Yeah, exactly. And, the article makes a really powerful point. Trying to separate Jesus from his Jewish roots doesn't just distort history. It actually, like, weakens the core of Christianity itself.
So it's not just bad history, it's bad theology, too.
You could say that.
Okay, so let's jump into the comments section of this article.
All right. Always fun to see what people are saying.
It's like stepping into a lively discussion at a synagogue, you know? You've got some people who totally agree with the article's premise, and then you've got others who are like wrestling with the implications.
Yeah, that's the beauty of a good discussion. Everyone brings their own perspective.
Right. And there was this one comment that really stuck with me from a guy named Charles Chi Halevi.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
He gives this really interesting example of how Jewish teachings actually align with Jesus's message. He talks about that phrase, an eye for an eye.
Right, which a lot of people misunderstand, They think it's all about revenge.
Yeah, exactly. But Halevi explains how the Pharisees, this Jewish sect during Jesus's time, interpreted that phrase not literally, but as like a system for paying someone back for the harm done.
Financial compensation, not vengeance.
Yeah. So it totally challenges this common idea that Jewish law is like harsh or vindictive or something.
It's about justice, but not in a simplistic way.
Yeah. And that example just really drives home the point that to really get what Jesus was saying, you got to see it through the lens of his Jewish context.
It's like reading a book without knowing anything about the author or the time it was written in. You miss so much of the meaning.
So we've got this whole thing with people wanting their religion to be unique, which is leading to like rewriting history. And then you've got all this insightful commentary from people who are grappling with these questions. This deep dive is getting pretty interesting, right?
It is. What's really fascinating is that recognizing that Jesus was Jewish isn't just about getting the historical facts straight. It actually changes the way we think about Christianity as a whole.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Tell me more. So we're talking about like way more than just getting the facts straight, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Understanding that Jesus was a Jew actually changes like how we see Christianity, like at its core.
It challenges us to rethink some of those basic assumptions we make.
Right.
If Jesus, like, lived and taught within a Jewish context, then wouldn't his teachings naturally be rooted in Jewish thought and tradition?
That makes total sense when you put it like that. And it makes me think of what the article's author, Anthony J. Saldarini, said about taking Jesus out of his Jewish world.
Yeah.
He says it doesn't just distort history, it like destroys the essence of both Jesus and Christianity.
He's totally right.
Right.
When we try to create this version of Jesus that, like, transcends his Jewishness, what we end up with is like an empty shell.
Yeah, totally disconnected from his actual life and his teachings.
Exactly.
So are we saying that to like fully get Christianity, you almost have to understand Judaism first?
It's not about which comes first,
Uh-huh.
but about seeing them as, like, intertwined.
Okay.
Think about it. Jesus constantly referenced the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament.
Right.
He didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So his teachings were built on that foundation.
So it's less about two separate religions and more like chapters in the same story.
Yeah, I like that. And like any good story, understanding the early chapters helps you understand the later ones even better.
This is making me rethink how I've always thought about the Bible. It's like realizing that a book I thought was a standalone story is actually part of like a whole epic saga.
Exactly. It adds so much more depth and makes the whole thing way more compelling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So are there like specific examples of Jesus's teachings that we can better understand by looking at them through this Jewish lens?
Oh, tons. For instance, Jesus' focus on social justice, his concern for the poor and marginalized. These weren't new ideas. They were deeply rooted in Jewish values and prophetic traditions.
So he wasn't like some radical revolutionary as much as a continuation of that line of thought.
Exactly. And that connection becomes crystal clear when we look at Jesus within the context of his Jewish identity.
But if this connection is so important, why has there been so much pushback against it, Like, why are some people so resistant?
Well, the article talks about this concept of exceptionalism.
Exceptionalism.
Yeah, like how as humans, we often want to believe that our beliefs and our groups are special, better than others, right?
Oh, I see. So, like, admitting that Christianity has deep roots in Judaism might threaten that sense of specialness for some folks.
For some, yeah. But it's important to remember that recognizing the connection between different faiths doesn't diminish the unique aspects of each one.
It's like appreciating the different branches of a tree, but knowing that they all share the same roots and trunk.
Exactly. And, understanding those shared roots can really strengthen understanding and respect between different faiths.
Reading through the comments, it really struck me how many different viewpoints there are, even within Christianity, on this whole issue of Jesus Jewishness.
That's true. It's a reminder that there are many different perspectives and interpretations, even within the same religion.
Yeah. Seems like there's a whole range of views, from those who fully embrace Jesus's Jewishness to those who still struggle with it.
And that's totally fine. What's important is that we approach these conversations with an open mind.
And a willingness to learn from each other.
Absolutely.
One thing that's really staying with me from all this is the idea that trying to separate Jesus from his Jewishness is actually, like, harmful.
That's a really crucial point, and it's something the article emphasizes over and over again. When we create a version of Jesus that has nothing to do with his Jewish background, we're basically continuing those same harmful stereotypes and prejudices that have existed for centuries.
It's almost like by denying Jesus's Jewishness, we're contributing to that same kind of thinking that led to persecution of Jewish people throughout history.
That's a really powerful and disturbing thought. And it really highlights the importance of understanding the historical context of these beliefs.
It makes me wonder if, like, some of the anti-Semitism that still exists today is partly a consequence of this attempt to separate Jesus from his Jewish roots.
It's definitely a possibility. When we fail to see the connection between Christianity and Judaism, we open the door for misunderstanding and prejudice to take root.
This whole deep dive has really made me think about how my own understanding of Christianity has been shaped by, like, how I was taught to see Jesus.
That's a really normal response. And, it's important to remember that how we understand faith is always evolving. As we learn and grow, our perspectives change.
So if we really want to fight anti-Semitism and foster understanding between faiths, we have to start by acknowledging and embracing the fact that Jesus was a Jew.
I think that's a fantastic place to start. It's about recognizing the shared origins of our beliefs.
Yeah.
And appreciating the rich and complex history of religion.
It's like learning to appreciate a symphony by understanding the different instruments and how they work together to create something beautiful.
And a beautiful analogy. It really captures the idea that diversity, both within and between different faiths, is something to be celebrated, not feared.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about the historical and theological implications of recognizing Jesus's Jewishness. But I'm curious about the practical side of things. How does this knowledge actually change how we live and interact with people? So we talked about how seeing Jesus as Jewish, changes how we think about Christian history and theology, but how does that, like, translate to real life? Like, how does it change how we act with others?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that it helps us have better, more understanding conversations between different religions, especially between Christians and Jews.
You're saying that instead of focusing on what separates us, we should try to see what connects us.
Exactly. Acknowledging that our faiths share the same roots gives us a starting point for connection and empathy. Like, Imagine two people who come from totally different backgrounds, then they find out they have a common ancestor. All of a sudden, there's this whole new understanding and kinship between them.
That's a really good way to put it. It makes me think about how recognizing that Jesus was Jewish can help us to, like, challenge our own biases, you know, the assumptions we make about others.
Totally. It pushes us to look beyond our own limited perspectives and to engage with people in a way that's humble and respectful. We start to see individuals, not just stereotypes.
It's like learning a whole new language, right?
That's a great way to put it. And like learning any new language, it takes effort and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
This deep dive has seriously been an eye-opener for me. I'm realizing how much I still have to learn, not just about Jesus and the fact that he was Jewish, but about Judaism itself.
That's fantastic. I'd encourage you to keep learning. There are so many great resources out there, books, articles, even other podcasts, all created by Jewish scholars and thinkers.
Any recommendations for where to start? Like a specific book or something?
One that comes to mind is The Misunderstood Jew by Amy Jill Levine. It's a really good introduction to understanding Jesus from a Jewish perspective.
Awesome. I'm adding that to my reading list. Another thing I've been thinking about is the role of education. Like, if we want to stop anti-Semitism and help people from different faiths understand each other, we need to teach kids about Jesus' Jewishness from a young age.
I totally agree. Education is so important. When we teach kids about the history and culture behind religious figures, it helps them develop a much deeper and more respectful understanding of different faiths. Instead of seeing us versus them, they start to see the shared humanity that connects us all.
It's like we're planting these seeds of empathy and understanding that'll hopefully grow into a more tolerant and compassionate world.
I love that. Such a great image.
So where do we go from here? I think this deep dive has really shown us that seeing Jesus as Jewish isn't just some random historical fact. It's actually super important for building harmony between different faiths and making the world a more just and compassionate place.
You nailed it. It's about challenging ourselves to look at our own biases, to approach other faiths with humility and respect, and to recognize the shared humanity that connects us all.
This has been a really incredible journey, and I feel like this is just the start of a much bigger exploration for all of us. Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. How can you use what we talked about today in your own life? What steps can you take to learn more about Judaism and to encourage understanding between faiths in your own community?
Those are great questions, and I think trying to answer them can lead to a richer, more meaningful understanding of both faith and humanity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.